Matthew is another person who contacted the LCS last year with a project idea, and we didn't monetarily fund this one, but Matthew and some other people from the Conlang mailing lists wanted to take on this volunteer role, and we supplied the web hosting for it, which hopefully it's working for you now, Matthew. You'll tell us about this.
Yeah.
So we're excited to hear what you've been doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. Nice to be here. Hello to everybody. The Conlang Database Project. What is it? It is a publicly viewable and searchable online database that lists as many of the world's conlangs as possible in one place with identifying and classifying information. That's the basic take-home definition. Now, if we go into that in more detail, regarding specific purposes, we want to gather details of as many conlangs as possible in one place. We want to make the collection searchable in versatile ways. Thereby, we want to benefit searchers and the conlangs creators by providing that information. And in fact, we want to enable the copying and use of the data by anyone interested. How is this going to be physically manifested? Well, on a website, which is housing a database, and that website enables for website visitors the entering of new conlang data, searching of the database for conlangs that are already on there. There'll be a contact form, and there'll be some extra pages. I've written an FAQ. As regards the search results, they will be displayed on screen. Ideally, they will be manipulable. That means things like reorderable. So you can maybe order them alphabetically according to different fields. And hopefully exportable, things like downloaded or copied. Now, what a lot of people ask is, well, isn't there already something like this? Our answer is that there are some similar resources out there, but not quite the same. The obvious comparison is with CALS, the Conlang Atlas of Language Structures, which is also hosted by the LCS and has been going some years, and it is also a database of conlangs. It has, I think, over 1,000. But CALS focuses on WALS type typological data. WALS is the World Atlas of Linguistic Structures. That is a linguistics resource for natural languages. It looks at basically qualities of natural languages to do with like their phonology, the grammar, and groups them into types according to those features. That's not what we're looking at with the Conlang database, so we do have a slightly different purpose. I do recommend, by the way, that if you don't know CALS, that you go and have a look at it anyway, because it is fantastic. There are many wikis, Conlang wikis, workshops like ConWorkshop, discussion sites, whether forums or Facebook groups or other things. And there are many link lists, people on their personal pages with lists of conlangs linked to. So there are lots of collections of conlangs in these places, with but they're not exhaustive. They're not aiming to collect all of them as many as possible, and they're not always up to date, and they're not always with extra information. But our database is aiming to collect as many as possible in general in one place to enable that database to be searched. So it's not simply a list, but it's going to be able to search it according to different criteria. It's going to have identifying and classifying information, and perhaps most importantly, it will have a portal role. So you're not meant to simply find all the information you want on the database. The database will tell you that a language exists that maybe you're interested in, and it will give you a link through to the individual pages on that conlang. It could be a grammar or a dictionary or a whole website on it. So what inspired us to come up with this idea? Well, several reasons. Firstly, I think that with regard to many hobbies, often people want to document the hobby. They want to collect all the examples of that hobby, or they want to give guidance to other people, show them where the examples of it are. That's sort of what we're doing here. LangMaker was a website that was around in the 2000s. In its time, it was probably the greatest kind of store online of information about conlangs. Unfortunately, it went down towards the end of the 2000s. In fact, a lot of the data is still available on the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive website. And in fact, also there has been a book published a few years ago by Mark Rosenfelder, summarizing a lot of the information that's been saved. So we're kind of inspired by LangMaker. We want to create something that people will look to in a similar way. There's also a question of, in my and other people's, we collect maybe browser bookmarks of conlangs, or we collect several of them for a personal website in a linked list. And then I kind of think to myself, well, how many more am I going to add? Am I going to try and add all of them, or am I going to, I tend to be an all or nothing kind of person. So I began to think, well, this is a really massive job if I want to collect all the details of all these conlangs. It's not a job for one person, and it would be better if it was done on a database rather than just in a hierarchical list. And finally, I think for me, it's quite important for the conlanging world to provide some sort of evidence base about the nature of conlanging for people who are not in our world to learn from. So people in the media, when they're talking about conlanging, or in academia and things like linguistics, they might benefit from some kind of place to go to where they can find, I think particularly things like the scale of conlanging, how many there are, how many conlangs there are in the world. Need to move on. So who is running it? Well, a group of us. When I started this, I basically thought that it needs to be, a group project where people collaborate. So although myself and Aritra Sarkar kind of were the initial people, we have created social media locations on Discord and Facebook and Reddit, where we discuss with people, and I prefer to kind of put issues out to question and discussion than just deciding. So there are about 110 people, for instance, in the Discord server. So there's quite a lot of people who have been part of the conversation. In terms of actually running the database on the website, these are the roles. So reviewers will check conlang data when it's submitted to us. So if people are entering conlangs via the form on the website, we have to check that. We have to check if things like things missing or wrong, or we just have to verify it before we accept it for the database. Compiler is another role which involves going out into the conlang world, into the various websites of conlanging, and finding new conlangs to add to the database. In some cases that might be quite easy. In some cases it might be scouring, forum threads over many years from discussion forums, that kind of thing. And the organizers oversee the whole project. So we basically we coordinate and set the direction for the whole thing. We manage the website and database, and we do the sort of thing I'm doing right now, which is representing the project to the world as publicity. But these roles are not, they're not people, they're roles. So one person could actually have any combination of those roles. And in my case, I imagine I'll be doing, quite a lot of all three. For more information, well, we have our website now, database.conlang.org. I think it's fairly easy to remember. We're hosted by the Language Creation Society, wonderful. And before we got that, we were planning the project on Google Docs in various planning documents. I created one called simply the Conlang Database Project, and then there have been some subsidiary documents as well. And from the beginning, Aritra created a publicly editable spreadsheet in Google Sheets for people to add their conlangs. And an amazing, something between 700 and 800 conlangs were added to that before we even started the database. They have now been added to that database, and they're visible on it. This is a screenshot of that spreadsheet. So I think it's quite an early period of it. I think it looks quite different now. You may be able to see some of your favorite conlangs on there. We've had a couple of logos designed for us. That's very nice. The one on the left, I mean, they're both based ultimately on the conlang flag, of course. Brad Arends has used some representative symbols from conscripts at the bottom there, and you might not be able to see, but the ziggurat of the Tower of Babel is actually styled like the drawers of a filing cabinet, symbolizing a database. Das Wontons is more, that's a regular database icon, and it's quite iconic. That's definitely something we could use for instance, a browser address bar icon, I think. Who is going to benefit? Well, the conlang interested, which basically means conlangers, but also people who aren't actually making conlangs themselves, but who are just interested in learning about them. They may be looking for certain kinds of conlang, or they may be looking for a conlang that they heard about once and can't remember the details of and hope to find again. Conlangers will also benefit from having other people find out about their languages. And more people who work in the media or education or linguistics who might want to talk about conlangs in their work will find some useful information there. Inclusion, exclusion. What are we going to include and what are we going to exclude? Well, I mean, I think the first two lines pretty much say it. We're going to include as many conlangs as possible. And we're going to exclude anything which is not a conlang, but it's then a question of defining exactly where the boundary is. So I had to think about it. I actually was writing a talk on philosophical languages, and I came up with these three criteria for something to be conlang. So it has to be linguistic, which means it has to be not only a system of communication, but it has to involve some kind of grammar and stuff. It can't be just a form of an existing natural language, like a language reform project or a language game, that kind of thing, or a cant or an argot, that kind of thing. So it has to stand alone, so even if it's a version of an existing conlang, it has to in some way stand alone or be a new thing. But that is still incredibly inclusive. It includes sketch langs, even if they've not got very far, joke langs, even though they're not serious, con pigeons, even though they're created in a slightly different way from other conlangs and so on. So we are generally going to err on the side of inclusion. I mean, if somebody searching the database is not interested in a certain kind of conlang, that's fine. They just exclude that in their search, but it's there in, that type of conlang may be there for other people to find. Legal status of the data. So basically, the project is community spirited. It's for a community purpose. It's not for any kind of commercial purpose. We're not aiming to own the data or profit from it in any way. And it will have a Creative Commons license, probably CC by SA. And so the data can be used by anybody as long as they attribute the Conlang database and they share the data with the same license. So we will not have any copyright information, so we will not be infringing copyright anywhere. So all the data will be collected from the public domain, or it'll be the result of compilers deciding a category, like what type it is and that kind of thing. So we're not doing things like collecting people's grammars or dictionaries, which they may not want to be shared in that way. What information will be stored? Okay, so this is we're going into the nitty-gritty of the structure of the database. There are 13 fields per entry. There are two basic groups. The identifying information is things like the name, the date, links. The classifying information is things like the type. Vocabulary source is a code for a priori versus a posteriori. I was trying to, come up with some way around those terms. Physical modes is like speech or writing or signing and so on. An extended developmental level is, you know, if it's a sketch lang, is it fully developed? Has it got users? Has it got a community? That kind of thing. How much has it been developed? And though the classifying ones do not have a free text entry, they have limited menus of options to choose from. Whereas the identifying information is effectively just typing some string, you know, character strings in. There is another field notes at the end, which is will allow for larger, more detailed information, and that's an opportunity for the creator or whoever else is entering the data to express what is distinctive and noteworthy about that language. So that is where you put things that aren't, you can't put in any of the other categories. Like, you know, it's got alienable versus inalienable possession or something like that. So whatever people think is the interesting stuff, you know, they want people to know about, they can put it in there, and it will be searchable. Summary of the fields. So here we have the 13 fields. Now I've color coded them, so the ones with the limited option menus are in red, and the blue ones will allow for multiple lines. So in the case of the conlang name or the creator's name, if, for instance, the name has changed, you could put two different names in, or maybe different names at the same time. If there's more than one creator, like if it's a partnership between two people, you can put two creators' names in. Or if the creator, for instance, has a pseudonym and a real name. By the way, the real name is not compulsory. So if a person is only known by a pseudonym or doesn't want their real name to be known, that's absolutely fine. You know, we will take whatever names people want to use. Many of these fields will not have content for many languages. Like, for instance, most languages won't have a registry code. And groups, for instance, is about if a language is in a genealogical group, like it's in a constructed language family, or if it's maybe an alternative history one in an existing language family. But, you know, a lot of conlangs aren't in any groups, so there just won't be anything in that. And that's absolutely fine. You know, we shouldn't be expecting every field to be filled in every entry. I did think about trying to go into detail about, say, the types or you know, the options in those things, but I realized it was really going to take too long. So, but I will answer questions about those if people have them. Okay, so the process of adding conlangs. Now, I've got about 6 slides on this. So there's 2 ways that conlangs can be added now. So you can, the public can basically put it in the input form on the website. We're using the word contributor to name that role. Basically, the compiler's already mentioned we'll add conlangs by going out and looking for them from all sorts of different sources. So first, looking at the conlang submission form. I don't know if I can. I don't know if you can actually see that, unless I increase the magnification. But basically, you've got some screenshots here of the submission form as it stands. So you can see international names, the name in English or whatever, name in itself, native name, registry code, creators, and so on. So each of the, you know, 3 of those on the left there have room for several lines. On the right hand side in types, you've got a list of types with checkbox icons next to them, so you can check any combination of those. So it could be both a lost lang and a conword lang or something like that. So that's what, and now of course this is how it looks at the moment. It will change as we edit that form and you know, change the layout and the appearance and that kind of thing. Data field priorities, they're not necessarily all equal in priority. The most important ones are the conlang name and the link or other reference information, usually a link. Firstly, these will enable the viewer of the database to go out and find more about that conlang for themselves, so they can actually just look it up and they'll probably learn all they need to know anyway. But secondly, for us running the database, if we are given only those bits of information, we can go and find it for ourselves as well, and we can fill in the rest. Of course, we'd rather people submitted as much information as they can, because that gives us less work. But we'd rather somebody sort of dropped off a couple of references like that than didn't tell us about a language at all. Having said that, we do aim to include as much data as possible. It is reiterating the point about the portal role. The main role is not to tell them everything about the conlang, but to enable people to find conlangs they're interested in, and then to go and look at them on their own pages. Okay, so what if a conlanger doesn't want their languages on the database? Well, if they really insist that we will remove them, but we should say that we are only including public domain data, and we are talking about ones that have already been publicized by the creator on a wiki or forum, or maybe in a book or something. So we're not, we don't feel we're violating any kind of legal or ethical norm there. And this brings us to the question of what about people telling us about conlangs of which there is no direct evidence that we can check. So it's a fact, for instance, that sometimes people lose their notes. I think sometimes actually people deliberately lose their notes of their first conlang. But basically, if people bring one to our attention that they say they created themselves, unless it's really obvious that they're making it up, we'll probably take their word for it. But if they're talking about a language they know somebody else has made, well, we don't know that the person who's made it actually wants it to be made public. So we would probably refuse unless that person came forward themselves. So we're trying to respect people's wishes there. Who can submit a conlang? Its creator or anyone else. So it's okay to submit someone else's conlang to the database. And of course, in some cases, like ones from the past, they're not alive anymore to submit it themselves, so there's no other option. So if they don't want their language in the database, the non-inclusion policy we just looked at will apply. But what's more likely than that is they don't mind it being on the database, but they don't quite agree with the data that's been added. They might want to categorize it differently or correct it somehow. But we think that mostly there won't be a major problem. The process after conlang submission, so the conlangs are not immediately added. There are various issues that we have to watch out for. And the reviewers basically will check the data. They may follow up links and compare what's actually on the on the internet or whatever, or in whatever location the information is, to what has been submitted in the form. They may actually contact the creator if they're findable. There may be some particularly difficult cases, difficult to decide what the truth is. In those, reviewers can consult each other and the organizers rather than just be left alone to make a decision on their own. Once the reviewer is satisfied, the conlang will be flagged as accepted and it will be in the database and it will appear in search results. Okay, editing already added conlangs. So as already noted, conlangers may want to change the data. Apart from anything else, it may have been accurate when entered, but the facts may have changed. They may have changed their language. So they may want to update it, or they may notice that there is some data that hasn't been included, and they want to complete it. So what they can do is send a message via the contact form with requested edits. I will try to make the contact form such that they can enter, things like an email address or some other way of trying to verify their identity. We cannot, of course, just assume that just because somebody sends us a message that they are the person who created the language, or that the information they're saying is correct. We have to check. Now, the lower part of that slide there. So there is always disagreement amongst conlangers about what terms mean. Things like types of conlang, what orgslang means, and artlang, and basically we've got a tension between trying to please people and not alienate them, and allow them to feel happy about the way that their conlang is represented on the database, and trying to bring the total collection under one consistent system of classification. Because if we, for instance, allow everyone to have their own unique descriptor for their language, we'll end up with hundreds of descriptors, And if we do statistics, then we'll just get a pie chart with, lots of incredibly thin sections. Whereas what we want to do is have realistic grouping together of sufficiently similar conlangs under consistent types. So this is going to be it's a tricky area, but we will attempt to maintain consistency while still accommodating creators. Compilation process. So we're moving on from the contributors contributing via the submission form. So the compilers will actively go out and search for conlangs, and this is best done in an organized way. And I've thought a lot about this. It'd be quite easy to duplicate effort by two people searching the same forum or searching the same wiki or something. And it'd be much better to avoid that by basically getting a consistent list of all the locations in advance, farming them out to people by agreement. And it would be quite good if people who, for instance, know a certain site are given the job of looking at that one, because they will, they know it better than others. They may feel happy about that. So where we can, we will try to match a compiler with sites that they're familiar with and are happy to search through. So we need to manage the workload in a sensible way. So I think we have to be realistic about the amount of time people have. I have limited time myself. Apart from anything else, we also want to conlang. We want to. My own conlang has suffered when I've been trying to do this project. So I think we have to do weekly arrangements of catching up at the weekend or something, allowing people to do their work when they like during the week, and being realistic and sensible about the number of hours. Otherwise, I think people might be alienated and sort of drift away. So where are we going to get compile the conlangs from? Well, this is a very much non-exhaustive list. These are just examples. So, I mean, Cal's already mentioned, Con Workshop I already mentioned, YouTube. So there are an awful lot of wikis. There are wikis that are not in English. There's one in French. There are discussion sites of all kinds. I didn't put on, there's a Usenet one. There's at least there's a couple of Polish, there's one Polish one, there's a couple of Spanish ones. There are all different places where we can get information from. And some of these, as I say, are quite easy to draw the information from. Others are going to take a lot of trawling. And I think we should just start with the easy and the low-hanging fruit and move towards the more difficult. Searching. This is probably the most interesting part. So in order to search the database, there is a search form on its own page. It features all the database fields. You can enter search terms to filter in any combination. Each field has its own input box. So they vary according to what the type of the field. So the ones like names obviously have a text entry. The ones with a limited menu of options have a menu. So we haven't implemented this yet, but we intend to have a wildcard option. So you could, if you know, for instance, that a language begins with AL and ends in IAN or something like that, you can put AL wildcard character IAN, and that will find it if it's there. And there should also be a general keyword search box, which is not specific to any one field, but will just range across all the fields. So you can simply find a particular term if you think it might be in a Conlang's record. And hopefully we'll also have a list whole database function. I mean, whether it will be on one page or maybe 100 per page or that kind of thing, but you could, as it were, browse through the whole database, perhaps in alphabetical order or some section thereof, rather than doing a more specific search. All of the search terms, the questions, the fields will have guidance texts. There will also, I should say, be guidance texts for the input form. So when people are inputting a conlang, there will eventually be some text there to help them understand what the field is about, what the options are. And it should be possible also to specify which of the fields you want to be displayed. So maybe you want to include fields that you're not searching for. So you're searching in certain fields, but you also want other ones to be displayed anyway, like maybe the name or the year or something like that. So all of that is quite versatile. Here we have another couple of screenshots. So on the left, you've got a screenshot. Sorry if this is too small. You've got a screenshot of the actual search form. That's how it looks at the moment. So you've got, for instance, the older than, younger than is for the date, and so on. And you notice down the bottom of there it says 793 results. That's how many entries there are on the database at the moment. Now I should say that some of them are test entries, and also if you look on the right hand side, this is a sample of the readout of the database currently in the T section, and it's cut off. I mean, it's only the first 5 or 6 fields, and the rest are sort of off the page. But it shows, you know, the name and the creator's name and the link there and so on. But you may notice that there's one conlang there who's been entered twice. So this is an example of the sort of thing that we will need to sort out in the reviewing process and the you know, overlooking the database. So how do you use the search results? Well, you should be able to reorder them. Maybe you can order them according to different fields, so not just the alphabetical order of the conlang name, but maybe the creator's name or maybe the year or something like that. You should be able to search again. Maybe you want to refine the search. You should be able to click through from any individual conlang entry to a page purely about that one conlang. It will simply list the details vertically, and there's an example of that on the right, a particularly well-known conlang there. And you should be able to click the link in the links field and go straight through to the conlang's own pages. Regarding exporting, we want to enable copying, obviously, to download the results, to download potentially the whole database, and to enable people to print it out usefully. All of these things, you know, are yet to be implemented properly, but you know, we're just starting. Statistics feature. This is something I added on late on in this in preparing this slide. So this is basically alongside the search facility. We want to be able to show statistical facts about how many conlangs are, particularly with particular qualities, or as a proportion of a given set, of the total set or any other set, maybe something like a pie chart. So we can, like, you know, finally settle the question of how many orgslangs there are to how many artlangs, that kind of thing. So again, that's not been implemented at all, but that is an ambition. Right, it's a very simple and simple slide, but I want to really focus on this in one slide on its own. So what would count as the database working successfully if members of the public are able to search it usefully and reliably? That is the criterion, as far as I'm concerned, for the project being successful. Other website features. So it's likely that we will have other pages, for instance, pages that explain, I mean, we'll have to explain conlang terms, and we'll have to explain how the database works and searching works, that kind of thing. So it's quite likely we'll have to go into some extra detail about that on separate pages. And conlang issues, things like, you know, because there are disagreements about classification, we'll probably have to go into that somewhere and go through the issues. And we'll have links, and you know, we'll link to all the other conlang sites out there. So progress and plans on the left is a list of things we have done, all in the passive voice, and on the right a bunch of plans and ambitions and intentions. So, you know, it's kind of half and half. So we've got pretty far. We've got a lot more to do. I've got a lot of detail in there about, you know, edit the input and search forms, add various features, You know, we haven't begun the compilation process at all. So there's a lot of things to do. How people can contribute, if anyone watching or listening is interested. So I've mentioned the 3 roles. Anyone's welcome to join in any of those roles. Or if you'd rather not directly be an actual project member, you can simply contribute conlangs via the website form. I haven't really mentioned it here, but it does also occur to me that if people want to contribute a lot of conlangs at once, it might be quite tedious to use the form over and over again. And we have, used a spreadsheet to collect a lot of conlangs and then added them to the database quite easily. So it might be an idea. It might be an idea for the compilers actually to collect, 10, 20, 30 conlangs, whatever it is, on a spreadsheet in the same format, and then submit that rather than using the form over and over again. But perhaps the form is more useful for people adding 1 or 2. There are certain specialist abilities that we would particularly like people with to join us with. So technical ones, if you know how to use WordPress, PHP or MySQL, that's what we're using. So you'd be really welcome to join our team doing those kinds of things. If you have familiarity with particular sites and you'd like to help compile the conlangs in them, we would definitely welcome you for that. And if you have knowledge of languages used in non-English locations, that would be great. We've already had 1 or 2 members who speak Spanish pop up about, and I've talked to them about that. So you can come to our discussion spaces. You can send us a message or sign up with the volunteer form. If you go to the website, database.conlang.org, find the FAQ page, everything else is linked from there. The Discord server and the Facebook group and everything is linked from there. Okay, so that's your route to find out how to get in touch with us. When will the database be finished? Probably never, because presumably people will be adding, creating more conlangs, so there'll always be a few more to add. But also there might even be some old ones, sort of earlier ones that just we haven't heard about yet, and we have to add those as well. So rather than trying to imagine there's going to be some sort of endpoint, a bit like with creating a conlang, there isn't really an endpoint. We just imagine that the addition will continue indefinitely, but perhaps early on more busily, and then later on it might be smaller scale maintenance. I should add also, by the way, that I don't intend to be running the project forever. I mean, I'm giving myself about 2 years max. And then I'm going to want to hand on to somebody else, because being honest about it, those of us who are really leading it, we've put a lot of work on our backs. We've put a couple of years worth of a lot of work on ourselves. So I'd really like to get more. I mean, basically, the more people join and take part, the quicker it will work. Finally, I'd like to thank a bunch of people. So my thanks go to Eritrea for being there from the start and giving me a nudge when I needed to, and always having a very clear and very inclusive vision of how it should be. Thank you. Thank you to Joseph for being incredibly welcoming and encouraging, and really looking after us within the LCS. Thank you to Tony for setting us up on the server and being there to answer questions and help when we're setting ourselves up on the server. And thank you to Mike for doing the work of setting up the database and configuring it, adding all of the conlangs from the spreadsheet, and then adding the forms on the website and lots of other things. And I'd also like to thank all the other people who've been part of the project already, people who are in our discussion sites, and people who've given us advice and help, and also the people who've added almost 800 conlangs already to this database. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Now, I mean, personally, any help I gave is was just saying, I'm sure we can figure out a way to do this, but I certainly don't know what it is because I don't know this side of
Mm.
technology. So that was all people like Tony and Jeffrey and Tim and yourself figuring out solutions to those problems. But it sounds like they're working.
Yeah.
Um, I think all of the questions that have been popping up in the YouTube chat came just slightly before you answered them in the run of your talk.
Right.
But because I don't understand a lot of this tech stuff, Logan here in the Zoom chat asked, will there be a machine readable API? And maybe you can
I have
address
to be
that.
honest, I don't know because I don't know enough about that tech stuff either. So if it's something that can be done, then yes. In fact, we did have a question from somebody in one of our groups. Um, I think he wanted to create an app for mobiles that might be able to access the database. So that would be, and then it's a question of like security, because how is the app reading the database if it's not going through the form on the website? So there are security questions about that, but if they can be overcome, I don't see why we can't have that kind of thing. Yeah.
Logan, if you want to unmute and be any more specific than I can be by reading your your question, you're welcome to do so.
Uh, well, I have unmuted. I'm not sure how to be more specific, but yeah, so an app for the phone would be one sort of obvious thing that would make use of a machine readable API. So if we want to support that, then I take that as a positive answer to my question.
Good enough.
And I also agree with the comment that Sai has made. A properly authenticated API will provide security, but much like Sai, I don't think I can explain that quickly either.
Right. That's something we'll have to follow up on. Yeah. Thanks very much for asking that.
And you already told people how they could join. Margaret, for example, was interested in joining because she's worked on some other database projects. Zino Wheel, I'm totally butchering that, is curious, will it get a name other than Conlang Database Project?
That is a good question. I mean, when I didn't think of like a kind of some brand name or something. Something else I ought to mention is that I'm not assuming that this is the only one of this kind. Apart from anything else, the whole database will be available for people to copy. So somebody might think, oh, I quite like that, but there's one or two things I don't like about it. So they can just copy the thing and do their own. So, because I mean, every now and then I was imagining doing publicity where we're talking about putting conlangs in one central place. I thought, no, not central, because that sounds like you're setting yourself up as like some kind of sort of official thing. There's no officialness about it. It's a particular community project which is going to create a particular database, and other people are welcome to create other databases of a similar or slightly different kind. But as to a more distinctive name, it's a good question. If it becomes necessary, then we should do that, I think. And I think I like CDP now because it is more distinctive actually than just saying Conlang database, because after all, things like CALs that is actually a Conlang database. So I don't know. So again, that is something that we'll have to think about. Mostly at the moment, I'm focusing on getting the website to work.
Mystic, I can't put a T and an N together in one onset. Mystic Tnadesir. I am in the process of coding a Conlang tool thing. Would somebody be able to access the data for something like this?
Probably. I mean, if it's the same issue as the question with the API and the question with the phone app, I imagine that yes. I think that's just an angle that we have to think about on a technical level at some point, and probably there will be some way to enable all of these ideas.
And I see Matt was asking about editing, but he was actually thinking about a different thing, and you did explain how to edit. Are there any? Okay, yeah, it looks like Mike has answered Mystic Snadesier's question there in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Ejectivized Snadesier. Yeah, that is easier to say. Well, I'm going to thank you, Matthew, but I'm going to hold on for an extra moment to see if anyone else in the YouTube chat or here on the Zoom chat has another question for you. Butchered that name, yeah. Yeah, I did. I know there's about a 15 to 30-second delay on what we say and then receiving comments back. Sorry for the lull at the end of the day here. Yeah, a lot of the comments popping in are just are saying thank you and praising that it is an excellent project and something that the community does seem excited about.